Hi, everybody. Brian Norcross here with your Sunday midday update on Tropical Storm Debby. Unfortunately, Debby is intensifying, and that's going to make the outer bands that are hitting West Florida stronger. And the indications are that the landfall intensity will be stronger. Hurricane hunters flying out there and examining the storm with their tail Doppler radar have found that the negative influences that have been driving the dry air into the system seem to be relaxing, and the system is trying to wrap up and form an eye wall. Here on the satellite, we can see that. You can see it's taking on more of a comma shape as it's trying to wrap around the side and fight off the dry air here. And that hurricane hunters that are flying in there are finding that process is underway, and one of the ramifications of that is that the pressure is dropping like crazy. It's down to suddenly 992 millibars. So that's a big drop, an indication that the mechanics of the storm are getting into place to allow it to develop and perhaps rapidly develop. So it's 65 miles an hour now is the estimate of the top winds in the circulation, and the top winds are on this side over here, not reaching land, although very strong wind gusts are over the land areas. Moving north-northwest at 13, so it is slowing down, but it is going to move, all indications are, on up toward the panhandle and begin the bend to the right, but actually slowly slow down before it comes to essentially a stall sometime after it makes landfall. Okay, so here's the radar right now. Notice as I'm recording this at 11:30 Eastern time, tornado warnings over here in this outer band. And we also have a band, now that the sun is out, we're going to have bands farther out on the East Coast, and it won't be as robust as the ones on the West Coast, but individual, very strong thunderstorm, but fast moving cells all the way from the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area on up the I-95 corridor on the East Coast. But of course, on the West Coast is where the more intense bands will be. Let's look at the current radar right now out of Tampa, Ruskin actually radar. There you see the cells. See those individual cells right there? This one and this one. And when they're isolated like that, that's when you can get the tornadoes. So you can even get them out in here. So we'll just beware of that. Although the tornadoes are not terribly strong, and they move with move so quickly, they're more like a really intense gust when they come by. So the strongest winds are in here, and then each band out here getting farther out, maybe the gusts are not quite as high, although when you get those tornadoes, you have very high gusts. But right now, there's this line that comes from Fort Myers on inland, then up to Sarasota, pushing to St. Petersburg. And as we put this into motion here, you'll be able to see how they're rotating. And you notice they kind of go over the same area over and over again. So very heavy rain in the areas where they're falling because of that perpetual motion. It's technically called training over that same area. So this is why we have the tropical storm warnings in effect for the entire west coast of Florida. We can expect winds of tropical storm force 40 miles per hour or higher, some gusts up to 50, 60, maybe 70 miles per hour in a very intense cell going by there. So this can take out power. This can cause problems. Don't park your car under a tree, for example. Keep it out in the open and let this thing go on by. All right, so here is the new forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. The thinking is that by this evening, it will have reached hurricane strength to the northwest of Tampa. Now, at this time, the winds are going to be coming around like this and pushing water into the coast here. Now, the good thing is this is not at high tide as we currently see it for this part of the coast, but the tide and the storm surge, where you get the biggest push from the wind, and when they go inside, then we're going to get these very high amounts, and I'll show you those forecasts here in just a second. But a hurricane force storm, but remember it's bigger than this, so the outer bands are going to be over the coast over here in the evening hours, pushing north, And then we get landfall in the morning. The estimate now is for this line is nominally 8 a.m. Eastern time. So that the question is, of course, whether it comes ashore to the left side of the cone. That would put a hurricane in Tallahassee. If it was 90 miles an hour at the coast, maybe it's 80 or 75 miles per hour in Tallahassee, but that would be very, very damaging because of the trees there. And also, construction is not made for hurricanes in Tallahassee. So everybody is going to be thinking about where their safe spot is going to be. Also, where are you going to park your car? Park it in a parking garage at FSU, or park it in a state parking garage, or any other place you can find that's not under a tree and not where debris might blow around and hit it. The worst thing is to, I mean, there are a lot of worse things, I guess, but if you're in your home or you're in your apartment, then you have some kind of damage and you have to deal with that, but then you don't have your car for transportation. That's a terrible combination. Now remember that when the storm, wherever it comes ashore, let's say it comes ashore there, the winds are coming like this, and the strongest wind is on the right side. And remember, this is not a small storm. So we're talking about Perry and Lake City and Live Oak and down to Gainesville and other locations there in North Florida for potential of very strong winds, enough to take down trees, and then eventually even over to Jacksonville. But by that time, the storm will be weaker, but still very, very gusty winds left over with the hurricane. And then we get into the next phase of the storm, which is a completely different phase from the time. Look at this. So this is Monday evening. And then this, let me do the morning time periods. Let me erase that. So here it is Monday morning. Then here it is Tuesday morning. So it hasn't even gotten to all the way to Georgia yet. And then Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday morning. So this, and remember that the rain and the wind is going to extend out from the storm. So this is going to be a long duration period of very gusty winds, even though the wind speeds are going to come down because it's over land, and the Hurricane Center is forecasting it currently to stay mostly over land. So they're not forecasting re-intensification, but notice they also allow for the possibility of it coming offshore. If it came offshore here, then the winds would be up 50, 60, maybe 70 miles an hour. And because it could come offshore, let's say it gets in this area Wednesday morning. Now your winds are coming like this, and that's pushing storm surge into the coast all along here. So they're going to have storm surge alerts for there, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the main message is all the way from, let's say, about the Tampa Bay area, including Jacksonville, Charleston, Savannah, on up to Wilmington, this corridor in here, back to and including Tallahassee, is where an extended period of bad weather is going to be. It's going to clear Tallahassee sooner than all those other locations, but that's where the intense rain is going to be. And obviously, the back end of that corridor is going to clear sooner, but this is where the system is going to stall, up in here. And we can see that when we look at the computer models. There is no like obvious one, so the National Hurricane Center takes kind of an average of all this. But we look at this, we even have the H-Wharf turns it around and brings it way back in the Panhandle. I'm not saying that can't happen, because when a system stalls, lots of things can happen, and I'll talk about why it's stalling. But look at the GFS here. The GFS takes it and brings it back across Georgia toward Alabama. The H-Mon takes it up here. So the bottom line is we don't know where the center of it's going to go, but we know that there's going to be a lot of moisture that gets parked there, and we're just going to be aware of lots and lots and lots of possibilities. The main thing is, for anybody in the low country, if you're in an area that floods, know where your high ground is. That's the bottom line message here. So let's talk about that rain. This is the current forecast, subject to change, since we don't know exactly where the system, but it's a large system, so it can move around quite a bit and still rain in the same place. Right now, the bullseye is Charleston to Savannah, right in there, where we're talking about rain amounts more than 2 feet, maybe up to 30 inches in there, according to the forecast. But a lot of areas in see the corridor here, the red from Tampa on up, including Savannah and Charleston, and then to Wilmington, and then we come back this way. So that's the corridor of the biggest rain threat. And then what happens if it rains up here? It starts raining upstate, right? That water all comes down the rivers, down the creeks to the Atlantic Ocean. And at the same time, the winds are blowing the ocean water in. That even builds the water up higher in the lower elevation. So extraordinarily dangerous scenario developing for everywhere from the Big Bend. This body of water here is called Appalachia Bay into the Big Bend of Florida, which is this part here, the Nature Coast, it's called. Cities like Perry and, of course, Tallahassee, and then up to Valdosta, and continuing over to Jacksonville, Savannah, and Charleston. Everybody needs to be on high alert, know what their backup plan is, know where a safe spot is as this storm comes through tomorrow into Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Here's the tropical storm watch. The tropical storm conditions are possible here. They'll fine tune this as they go. Notice tropical storm warnings here for South Georgia. But the warnings and watches are based on time. So right now the expectation is that you could have winds over 40 miles an hour throughout that corridor there along the southeast coast. Now, when we also talked about the possibility of storm surge there, Hurricane Center says if the storm were to get somewhere near the coast and you get winds like this up to 4 feet above normal high tide. So at the high tide times, up to 4 feet above normal high tide, somewhere in that area is the possibility. All right, then we'll go back and talk about the landfall. Here you see the hurricane warning. This means hurricane force winds are possible there. Notice Tallahassee is not included in that. There is some confidence that the Tallahassee will be on the left side of it. So not the peak winds, but hurricane force gusts, at least in Tallahassee, which can be very damaging. But Perry, you folks in Taylor County there are right in the middle of it. Notice the hurricane warnings continue well inland. And then we have the storm surge. So the storm surge in this part of Florida is one of the most vulnerable parts of the entire U.S. coast. So from southeast of Tallahassee all the way around up to 10 feet above normal high tide, farther south down towards Cedar Key and Steinhatchee and Horseshoe Beach and places down the coast just a little bit, up to 7 feet above high tide. So again, I want to repeat what these numbers mean. It doesn't mean that everywhere in those zones are going to be that high. It means that somewhere in those zones, if it occurs at high tide, that's how high the water will be, 7 feet above the normal high tide. If it occurs at low tide, you can take a couple, some places 3 feet off of that as the peak. But that's where this is what people need to be ready for in case it comes in at high tide. And obviously over toward Apalachicola, the tide up to 6 feet above high tide. And the issue here is the nature of this coast. It's called the Nature Coast, but for a different reason. The nature of this coast is it's like a catcher's mitt, so it catches the water there and it just piles up, and it's very low around that area. Continuing farther south, so the Tampa Bay area, it's up to 4 feet, and already we're seeing some water rise in Tampa Bay, even with the winds offshore. But as the winds come around here, so they're blowing onshore at high tide, potential for up to 4 feet in some parts of the Tampa Bay area down to Fort Myers. That whole zone, exactly where the angle of the wind is going to be to make the water the highest, but be ready and know what you'll do if the tide is suddenly up to 4 feet. So most areas won't see that, obviously, because the angles aren't just right in the high tide cycle, doesn't jibe with that. But that's what everybody needs to be ready for. Okay, so here's what's going on in the weather pattern that's causing this headache. So here we are tomorrow morning, system is near landfall. Down here, we have a dip in the jet stream that's pulling it north, kind of tugging it north in this gap between the Bermuda high and the big heat dome high out in the west. So here comes the system to the north and somehow gets up there. Okay, then we go forward in time, and what happens is this dip in the jet stream moves out and it loses its grip, so to speak. So the system doesn't move very much by Tuesday morning. And then we move forward in time. Then the question is it offshore? Is it up here? Whatever. But the thing that's tugging it is missing. And this high here is coming along and it actually kind of bows out like that. And so that just slows down the progression and it sits in here. And that's why some of the models push it back. It's because of this high building to the north and pushing back this way. Other models say, no, it's just going to trap it in there because it's not going to have anything to pull it out as between those two highs. So that's why you see that diversity. It's got to do with how far this high builds back in here. But that's Wednesday, and then the low completely moves out, and then we have kind of a balance, and it's sitting here around Thursday, and then we'll just have to see what happens. The thinking is that eventually this high will come in here and another dip will come in the jet stream, and that will eventually take the thing out and offshore, but it looks like it's going to take a good part of the week before that's going to happen. So let me remind you that we're on Fox Weather. We're on day and night. Mike Seidel is covering it from the heart of that storm surge zone up there in Steinhatchee, just north of the Tampa Bay area. If you don't know how to get Fox Weather, there's your QR code and there's your address, foxweather.tv, and that'll tell you. You can get it online on your computer or on your phone. It's a free weather channel. I'm there, and of course we're covering this storm until it's over, which unfortunately is going to take us, looks like here, a few to several days before we know exactly what the outcome is with this storm. All right, have a good Sunday. If you're in the threat zone, be sure you know where your safe spot is, and I'll have another update for you here with the 5 o'clock advisory late this afternoon. All right, have a good day.